Hello everyone. Have you ever wondered what differentiates an advanced English learner from a sort of intermediate or upper intermediate English learner? In particular, what grammar do you need to be using to reach that C1 or even C2 level of English? Now that's a pretty big question to answer, but in this video we're going to look at 8 grammar areas which will really help you take that step up. Now, of course, in a YouTube video, we can't look at all the grammar in detail, but fortunately and coincidentally, I've just launched an online grammar course in which I do exactly that. I go into a lot of detail on the grammar concepts that I think will really help you reach that advanced level. But in this video, I'm going to share some of the grammar that will really make a difference to your English level. If you can start incorporating these structures into your active English, you will really notice a difference. And I wanted to start with ellipsis and substitution. Now, we often teach ellipsis and substitution together because they perform a similar role in grammar. Now, ellipsis is basically omitting words from a sentence to avoid repetition and redundancy. And substitution is substituting words or phrases in a sentence also to avoid repetition and redundancy. So let's look at an example. So we're starting with a couple of quite basic sentences. I'm thinking of a writing task here, maybe the review task. So you're reviewing a book. And we have 2 sentences. Are you a fan of romantic novels? If you are a fan of romantic novels, you will love this new release. Now, those sentences are fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with those sentences. They are grammatically correct. But as you can see, there's repetition there, right? We have, are you a fan of romantic novels? If you are a fan of romantic novels, and that's unnecessary. It's unnecessary to repeat a fan of romantic novels, and it's not very advanced. So to make that sentence more sophisticated, you have a couple of options. The first option is simply to remove a fan of romantic novels. So are you a fan of romantic novels? If you are, you will love this new release. So that's immediately a much more concise sentence, right? And more sophisticated and advanced. So this is an example of ellipsis. We're omitting or removing words or phrases from a sentence to make it more concise and avoid repetition and redundancy. The other option you have is substitution. So rather than just saying if you are, you can substitute the verb and the verb phrase with simply if so. And you're also substituting the subject, the pronoun here, because it's not necessary to repeat it. So, are you a fan of romantic novels? If so, you will love this new release. But of course, you may need to express the negative, right? Maybe this person is not a fan, so you'd say, if not, this new release is not for you, of course. So as you can see, just making those little tweaks to the sentence, just omitting or substituting words and phrases, it makes the sentence much more concise and sophisticated and just generally more advanced. And we use it a lot in English. So if you really want to reach that advanced level, I recommend you start using ellipsis and substitution. Next, I wanted to look at conditionals. Now, everybody loves conditionals. I've made a few videos on conditionals. I imagine you've all studied conditionals, but there are different levels of conditionals, of course. You have sort of the 0 and first conditional, which you should be learning at an intermediate level. You can get up to the sort of the second and third conditionals, which you probably learn at upper intermediate, a sort of B2 level. But then you get onto the sort of the mixed conditionals and alternatives to if and different structures within the conditionals, which again demonstrate a very high level of English. So I wanted to look at a couple of examples of conditionals now. So this first sentence is quite a nice sentence. Again, I could imagine it being used in a writing task, probably a report or a proposal here. So if the aforementioned measures are implemented in a timely manner, it is believed that results will be seen immediately. So it's a nice sentence, isn't it? Because of the vocabulary, so aforementioned, timely manner. So that makes it quite an advanced sentence, but it's actually just an example of the first conditional. The reason it seems quite advanced, apart from the vocabulary, is that it contains 3 examples of the passive form. So you're mixing grammar structures here. You have the conditional, but with the passive form, the passive voice. But let's look at another example, another conditional sentence. So had the measures been implemented earlier, the company would not be in such dire straits now. So what type of a conditional is this? Do you know? Well, it's mixed type 1 conditional. If you've seen my video on conditionals, you would have known that. Now we call it the mixed conditional because we're mixing the third conditional with the second conditional. Again, this is not the video to go into detail about this. I've made other videos, and again in my course I explain in more detail. But what makes this particular sentence so advanced and sophisticated is that it's using a lot of grammar, not just conditionals. So as you can see, it includes inversion and passive. So had the measures, that's inversion, and then be implemented, that's the passive voice. So we have a mixed conditional, type 1, inversion and passive voice all in one sentence, and some nice vocabulary with dire straits. So this is really what makes the difference. We're seeing some really advanced grammar here. So an intermediate level student would probably just use maybe a first conditional or a second conditional sentence, but to reach a C1 or C2 level, you should be using more advanced conditionals, but including different types of grammar within the sentence. So we saw an example of inversion within that conditional sentence, but I want to look at a couple of other examples of how we can use inversion. So this is a very basic sentence, some nice vocabulary again, but grammatically it's a very basic sentence. Again, perhaps from a review. The film is dull and derivative. So dull means boring and derivative means unoriginal. But if we want to make that sentence more sophisticated grammatically, we can use inversion. So not only is the film dull, but it is also derivative. So again, I made a video on this quite recently. So if you've seen that video, you should know this grammar, you should be familiar with this. So it's the not only but also inversion structure. So here you can see we have the inversion in this part, is the film. So that's made quite a basic sentence into a really sophisticated sentence and grammatically more impressive. So this would really impress the examiners in an English exam, but also we use it in real English, in real life. Another example of inversion, you should never share personal details online. So this is a basic sentence, it's just giving information, advice here. But we can use an adverbial phrase with inversion to make it, again, a more advanced sentence. So under no circumstances should you share personal details online. So the should you structure here is inversion. And when we use under no circumstances at the beginning of a sentence, it is followed by the inversion structure. Now, there are many other adverbial phrases you can use with this structure. Things like on no account, no sooner, hardly, seldom, rarely. Again, this is not the video to go into detail on all of that, but it's very important that you are aware that this is a nice, sophisticated structure which you can use in particular in your writing. It's quite formal, so we don't use it so much in our speaking, although it is possible. But what about clauses? Now, clauses in themselves are not necessarily advanced. Most sentences consist of clauses or are made up of clauses. But when we start using relative clauses, defining or non-defining relative clauses, and reduced clauses and prepositional clauses, that's when we really start to reach an advanced level. So let's look at a couple of examples. The politician makes a compelling case for an increase in funding. He is clearly in favor of the initiative. Okay, so that's two nice sentences, pretty basic, although with some nice vocabulary. But how can we convey this same idea in one sentence, but using a relative clause? So the politician who is clearly in favor of the initiative makes a compelling case for an increase in funding. So this is an example of non-defining relative clause, because who is clearly in favor of the initiative, that clause is extra non-essential information. So you can remove that clause and the sentence would still make sense. So you could say the politician makes a compelling case for an increase in funding. But you can even go a step further by using a reduced relative clause. So the politician, clearly in favor of the initiative, makes a compelling case for an increase in funding. So we've removed some information there, some words. Who is removed from this sentence, and it just becomes clearly. Because it's obvious from the context that that clause is referring to the politician, it's not necessary always to include the pronoun and the verb. Again, it's an example of ellipsis, so these grammar areas which are overlapping. So reduced relative clauses, defining relative clauses, non-defining relative clauses, these are all concepts that advanced English students should be using, I mean, in appropriate contexts, of course. It's not a case of just throwing these concepts into every sentence. Use them appropriately and in the right context. Another really useful grammar area to know about is cleft sentences. Again, an advanced student would use cleft sentences. So let's look at some examples. So you need to practice the writing tasks. You need to practice the writing tasks. That's true. You all need to practice the writing tasks if you're preparing for a Cambridge English exam. It's a basic sentence, but the more advanced sentence, a cleft sentence, is it is the writing tasks that you need to practice. Now, a cleft sentence is basically a sentence that is separated into two clauses in order to emphasize one aspect of the sentence. So in this case, we're emphasizing that it is the writing tasks. So cleft sentences can be used in our speaking. We do use them regularly, often in our speaking, but also in writing. Again, when examiners see an example of a cleft sentence, it really catches their eye. It really impresses them. So you can immediately get some extra marks in your exam if that's the objective. Another interesting grammar area, which on one hand is extremely basic. In fact, you probably studied this in one of your first ever English classes. It was probably one of the first things you learned. And that's subject-verb agreement. So this is referring to how the subject of a sentence must agree with the verb of a sentence. So a very basic example is, I am English. I can't say I is English or I are English. No, it's a singular pronoun. So we have to have the singular first person verb in this case. So I am English. Very basic, right? But sometimes people make mistakes. Even native English speakers make mistakes with subject-verb agreement. So the goalkeeper, as well as his teammates, are responsible for the defeat. Is that a correct sentence, do you think? Is the verb agreeing with the subject? Well, no, it's not. Because the subject here is the goalkeeper. So the goalkeeper are responsible for the defeat. It does not make sense. Although we have this extra information, as well as his teammates, and teammates is plural, that's not linking the verb to the subject. The subject is goalkeeper, so it must link with the verb. So the correct sentence is the goalkeeper, as well as his teammates, is responsible for the defeat. And that can sound a little bit strange in spoken English, right? Because you're mentioning teammates, which is plural, and then following that word with a singular verb. But when you see it written with the commas, it must be separated by commas, it makes more sense because you can see that it's extra information. But that's a very common mistake that I see students make, and as I said, I've even heard native English speakers make this mistake. Another grammar area which can cause problems and which often comes up in the Cambridge English exams is reported speech. Now, reported speech has certain rules that you must follow, but there's a lot to think about when constructing a sentence in reported speech. So reported speech is also sometimes known as indirect speech. So in this example, we have a sentence that somebody literally said. Derek literally said these words, "Have you been to the beach today?" So that's the question that literally came out of Derek's mouth when he was speaking to Susan. But of course, when I want to tell somebody what Derek said to Susan, I can't literally say the same thing. I have to report what Derek said. So this is how you would do it. Derek asked Susan whether she had been to the beach that day. So that's quite a complicated sentence because we've had to change a lot of things. First of all, we've had to add whether, because when we're reporting a yes-no question, we need to use either if or whether. So you could say Derek asked Susan if she had been to the beach. Also, we have to look at backshifting. So in the original sentence, Derek said, "Have you been to the beach?" That's the present perfect, but we have to backshift, so move the verb tense back one space in time. So it goes to the past perfect in this case. But then also that day, he said today, but when we're reporting this question, it's possible that we're reporting the question on a different day. So it's not today anymore, it's a different day. So you're reporting that day. So there's a lot to think about when constructing a reported speech sentence. You have to think about all of the grammar in the original sentence, so the verb tense. You have to think about the time references. You have to think about the pronouns. Again, this is not the video for that. Check out my online course where I go into a lot more detail and share a lot of examples. But it's a really important grammar area to learn and learn well, especially if you're taking an English exam. So it's very possible that you've studied a lot of that grammar before, and this was just some quick revision. but it's very important that you use it in practice. So start coming up with your own examples as always. Watch this video next if you need more help, and don't forget to check out my online course. I'll see you soon for another video.